Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? Edgman and a coming to you guys here today with another deck tech. So today we're going to be taking a look at a standard deck, and it is USA Control, so the good old red, white, and blue. Now, you guys have been requesting this deck for some time, but before we get to breaking it down, if you guys have any suggestions for future decks that you would like to see, please leave that down in the comments below, and I'll take it into future consideration for more deck techs. And also be sure to check out the playlist in the description as well, where I have all the previous decks archived that I've covered. Now, the first thing that we're going to be taking a look at here, as always, is going to be the land base for our decks. So we're running 26 lands, which is pretty standard with control decks. They'll run anywhere from 25 to 27. But 26 was just kind of our ideal number that we have here. And we're pretty much taking advantage of all the dual lands, shock lands that we have right now after Return to Ravnica is out. So we're running a playset of Hallowed Fountain. From there we have Steam Vents, which is also going to be a playset. And we have our Glacial Fortress as a playset. Sulfur Falls as a playset as well, and if you guys are wondering about this altar, there is a link down below in the description where you guys can find them. Clifftop Retreat as well is going to be a playset. And then we're moving into our utility land. So we have Desolate Lighthouse, taps for 1 generic mana. And he has his second ability as 1 generic, 1 blue, and 1 red. Tap, draw a card, and then discard a card. So Desolate Lighthouse is nice because later game, and even sometimes earlier game, whenever we have all of our lands in place and we don't really need any more lands, it's going to let us just keep on essentially cycling out our lands for drawing a little bit more. And it lets us actually get threats and things that we want to see resolving as opposed to, oh, just land drop constantly. But from there we have our basics. So we're running 2 mountains. We have 2 plains. And then we just have 1 island. So the way that the distribution of mana production goes with these lands is we have 14 lands that are going to be producing red, 14 that are going to be producing white, and 17 that are going to be producing blue, which is pretty on spot with where we want to be with all the production of mana and when we actually need the mana and all things like that. So blue is the most relevant thing. We want to have double blue and be able to play all of our things like the Dissipates, the Jaces, and stuff like that. So the mana base is fairly straightforward as far as anything goes. But now we're going to take a look at everything else in the deck that we have here. So all the creatures and other spells. So first off, we're starting off with our creatures. And we have Snapcaster Mage. So most control decks in the format right now are going to be using Snapcaster Mage as a 2 of, maybe as a 3 of, but we are actually using them as a playset in this deck, which may come as a surprise to a lot of players, but Snapcaster Mage is really strong, and especially in this deck because we're going to be playing a lot more Drago than a lot of the other decks that are control and that are in the format. With Snapcaster Mage, we're going to have the use of flashing back spells like Syncopate, Dissipate, and ultimately we're going to really constrict our opponent from being able to resolve much of anything, and the things that they do resolve we're just going to kind of let through because we have other ways to deal with it, whether it's like Terminus or Divine Verdict or anything like that. But Snapcaster Mage is definitely really strong in this build because we're going to be playing much more conservatively and we're not going to be letting our opponent play the things that they really want to be playing against early game stuff like aggro and decks like that. Snapcaster is also relevant to start flashing back Pillar of Flame and spells like that, but ultimately where we want to be with game 1 is just flashing back counter spells and anything that seems to be relevant against what our opponent's going to be playing. From there we have Niv-Mizzet Dracogenius, so we're running him as a 2 of in the deck. So aside from just being a threat himself as a 5/5 for 6 flyer, he has an ability where whenever he deals damage to a player, we can draw a card. And for 1 blue and 1 red, he can deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So if it's open for us to start pinging our opponent's creatures, and if that's what we really need to be doing, we can do that. But more times than none, his 2-mana ability is going to be used to ping our opponent. We can draw more cards, get more answers, get more threats, and just do all the things and get our opponent closer to 0 and just win the game from there. But Niv-Mizzet's definitely really strong. I seem to run him as a 2-of in just pretty much any control build that I have that allows him to be played in the colors, but Niv-Mizzet's definitely really strong. So we have him as a 2-of here. From there, we have our Planeswalkers. So we have Jace, Architect of Thought. So he's going to be a playset in the build. And Jace is really strong, mainly because he's just such a good utility Planeswalker in the control show. He's 4 loyalty, 4 cost. His /1 ability is going to make creatures smaller until our next turn. If they're going to be attacking, it's going to give them -1, -0 until the end of the turn. His -2 is also relevant because we're able to reveal the top 3 cards of our library. Our opponent separates them into 2 piles. We get to keep one. The other one goes to the bottom of our library. So, I mean, ultimately, you're going to get something that you really need off of that Jace. And even if you're not getting something that you need, if it's like all 3 of those cards are lands, you're still going to get those out of the way, and you're going to be able to draw more into the things that you actually need, and actually have the cards that you need to resolve to either win the game or win more, or whatever the situation is. But the +1 and the -2 are where we want to be. The -8 is also fairly relevant if we see the opportunity where we can go into a bribery to take something from our deck and from our opponent's deck that'll help us win the game. We can do that, but I mean, with the amount of removal that there is with Detention Sphere, Dreadbores, our opponent just using some sort of removal on it, like Pillar of Flame, or anything like that, or swinging in with creatures, Jace is pretty vulnerable, especially after the -2, but if we're trying to go for the -8, there's still ways to deal with them. But if we have a clear shot way of where we can counter those things and have it be so that our opponent can't get rid of them, we can go for the -8. But honestly, the place where we want to be with him is the -2 and the +1 to build them up a little bit more and use the -2 yet again. So playset of Jace, just really good for being able to dig. From there, we have Tamiyo. So Tamiyo is a 2-of in the build. So 4 loyalty, 5 cost. +1 lets us tap a permanent. It doesn't untap during its owner's next untap step. -2 lets us draw a card for each tapped creature target player controls. And the -8 is where we want to be with getting an emblem where we have no maximum hand size. And whenever a card is put into our graveyard from anywhere, we can return it to our hand. So Tamiyo is definitely really good. The ultimate emblem is just really, really strong because we have ways to just exploit the other spells that we have, especially if we're going into like Devil's Play. We can win with Devil's Play from there. Sphinx's Revelation to draw into more threats and stuff like that. But the emblem is really nice to have, and it pretty much assures you to have a win from there. It's not a straightforward win, but it's going to help you win a little bit easier, especially if you're playing cards like Devil's Play. But the +1 and the -2 are pretty fair as well. The +1, I really like it because after a board wipe, you're able to tap down your opponent's things. Like if they have Thragtusk, you board wipe, they get their 3/3, you can tap down that 3/3. Or you can just start tapping down their lands and keeping them off of whatever turn play that they're trying to go into. From there, we have our X cost spells. So we have Sphinx's Revelation. So the Revelation is definitely really strong right now. It's a better Blue Sun's Zenith. And for X amount of mana, 1 white and double blue, we gain X amount of life and draw X amount of cards. So it's really going to keep us in the game. It's going to let us gain life and draw cards as well. So we just get to fill our hand with all the cards that we really need. And the gaining life is also extremely relevant because it lets us come back into the game, especially if our opponent's been trying to overextend and get us really low in our life total. So Sphinx's Revelation just completely counteracts anything aggro that our opponent's trying to do. From there, we have Bonfire of the Damned. So we're running this as a 3-of in the build, and this was chosen to be used over Mizzet Mortars just because it was another way to deal damage to our opponent. Now, even if we're hard casting it for the XX and 1 red, it's still going to provide some use for us. But the Miracle is where we want to be. If we can Miracle a Bonfire, that's always awesome because we get to deal X amount of damage. We only have to pay 1 red for it, and it's so strong. But Bonfire was a little bit better because we have ways to board wipe already. We have the Terminus, we have the Divine Verdict. We have ways to deal with things, and Mizzet Mortars isn't really a whole lot of necessary. But with Bonfire, even against control, whenever it comes down to control, we're able to either hard cast it or hopefully miracle it and just deal damage and get our opponent closer to losing the game. So Bonfire was just another kind of like a fireball type of spell where, well, we can put in so much, we can deal so much damage, get closer. From there, we have Entreat the Angels. So the Miracle, again, is where we want to be with it, but we can still hard cast it. We get X amount of 4/4 White Angel creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. It's not a guaranteed win condition, but if there's no answer to it, it is a win condition there. But with Mizzet Mortars, Bonfire as well, even though the Miracle would be pretty lucky to get a Miracle for 4 after a Entreat resolution. But Mizzet Mortars, Sever the Bloodline are easy ways to deal with Entreat the Angels, so there's no guarantee that it's going to win us the game, but if our opponent doesn't have an answer to it, it's definitely going to get there. From there, we have Devil's Play, so like I mentioned it before, Devil's Play is another just X amount of damage type of spell where we put in X, we pay the 1 red, and we're going to deal that much damage to a creature or player. So if we need to get rid of a planeswalker or a creature desperately, we can get rid of it. So it's useful in that sense, but against decks like Control, we have it here where we can cast it, then we can flash it back, and it's just going to get us closer to win, if not win just outright. So Devil's Play is there. From there, we have Syncopate. So we're running Syncopate as a playset. And one of them's... There we go. There's the other one. Alright, so Syncopate is a playset for us here. Syncopate's really strong. It's versatile, especially against decks that are a little bit more aggressive and are playing with cheaper things. They tend to overextend a little bit more, and they're going to be a little bit more greedy with their plays and not leave mana open. So Syncopate's a little bit more permissible than Dissipate, where Dissipate is going to be a little bit harder to cast against really, really early game type of decks where they're going to have their stuff already on the field. But Syncopate, like if we're able to cast it turn 2 and counter something, it's definitely good. But Syncopate's versatile. It's definitely good either late game or early game sometimes as well, but it's easily flashback with Snapcaster, and that's what makes it good. So we're running a playset of it just to counter all the things that our opponent's trying to do. And it's also going to exile the card that we're countering as well, which is relevant against playing against stuff like Frights, so they don't get that card in their graveyard once it's countered, and also getting rid of Unburial Rites if they're trying to resolve it as well. But then we have Dissipate, so Dissipate's better against mid-range and control builds, and anything that's a little bit slower than the just traditional blowout aggro decks, just because they're going to get everything before we have a chance to Dissipate. But Dissipate's definitely really strong as well because it's the 3 mana instant, counter the spell, exile it, pretty straightforward. And we have the ability to flash it back with Snapcaster as well against slower decks as well, so it's nice. From there we have Azorius Charm, so we're running Azorius Charm as a 3-of in the build as well. So for 1 white and 1 blue, we can choose one to have our creatures gain lifelink, which sometimes is relevant, I guess, against the Entreat tokens, or, I don't know, if we're even swinging in with Niv-Mizzet and we really need the life. It's relevant in that sense. We can also draw a card off of it, or we can put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. So Azorius Charm is really nice because it's versatile, lets us have multiple uses, even though some of them may be a little bit less relevant than the other ones. But being able to draw off of it when we need it, and also being able to put a attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library, I think that that's really good in a 2-cost spell, even though it's so specific with the blue and the white. And from there we have our removal. So we're running Terminus as a play set, and Terminus is really strong because it doesn't have any bias against the whenever it dies type of abilities or any graveyard shenanigans, stuff like that. So Terminus just wipes the board, and all players are forced to put all creatures on the bottom of their owners' libraries. So Terminus is just really awesome. It's an easy way to deal with a lot of different decks. Obviously against Frights, you're not going to let those creatures go to the grave, so that's nice in that sense. Against stuff like zombies as well, it's pretty relevant too. And even against like humans and aggro builds, if they're running like Moorland Haunt or something like that, you get to get around that. But Moorland Haunt hasn't been way too huge in this season. But Terminus is just the blowout removal, and it's 6 cost, but it has a miracle cost for 1 white, so that's where we want to be with it. So we have the Terminus, and then we have 2 Supreme Verdicts. So Supreme Verdict is also good. It can't be countered. We destroy all creatures for 4 mana, 1 generic double white, and 1 blue. So Supreme Verdict, easy way to get in a uncounterable board wipe. So that's the main board. Pretty straightforward. I think the biggest thing that might stand out to people is that we're not running like Forbidden Alchemy or Think Twice. And the reason with that is because we want to have this be a little bit more controlling with running more counterspells than other decks might traditionally use in the main board. But it works in that sense where we're going to keep our opponent from playing things at the cost of not having as many ways to draw cards and just focusing on keeping our opponent from playing things. So that's the main board. We're going to take a look at the sideboard now. Alright, so with our sideboard, we have some things that are pretty typical as far as control decks go, and Jace Memory Adept is one of them. So Jace is good against any mid-range and control decks because they tend to be pretty slow when we have an easy way of countering out the rest of their things. So whenever we drop Jace Memory Adept, he's going to put them on the clock because his 0 ability is really relevant. So we just mill them out for 10 each turn and just get closer to winning. So 2 Jace Memory Adept, all the mill, all the win. We have Geist of St. Traft, so 2/2 for 3 mana, hexproof. He's a really good way to outrace control as well. Whenever he attacks, we get to put a 4/4 creature with flying onto the battlefield, then attacking. So he's going to essentially swing for 6 each turn, which is going to put control on the clock. So they have to start using cards like Terminus or Supreme Verdict to actually get rid of Geist of St. Traft, because cards like Detention Sphere, Oblivion Ring, and Azorius Charm can't target him. So we have the 2 Geists. From there, we also have Thundermaw Hellkite, which is another card where we can out-tempo other control and slower decks. So 5 cost and 5/5, flying, haste, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature with flying your opponent controls. Tap those creatures. So another way where you can just really outrace your opponent. He swings in for 5 the turn he comes out, and again, he's another card that puts your opponent on the clock. So we have 2 of them. From there, we have Negate. So Negate's pretty straightforward. Counter target non-creature spell. You flash it back easily with Snapcaster. Detention Sphere as well, even though it didn't make the cut for main board. Sideboard-wise, it's really nice whenever you side it in against other various decks with big threats and things that you need to get rid of. So Detention Sphere is relevant as a 2-of in the sideboard. You have a lot of 2-ofs as far as the sideboard goes, but we have Rest in Peace in here as well, so this is a 2-of as well. But Rest in Peace, even though it restricts us from flashing back our own spells, is really nice against Reanimator and also against stuff like zombies, because once it hits the table, they're not going to be able to play off of their graveyard shenanigans, which is a decent portion of the deck. Zombies not so much because they have the tempo there, but once you start like Supreme Verdicting their things, once Rest in Peace is out there, they really have no chance at winning and playing off of that Undying, so you just win from there. But Rest in Peace is another great way to just kind of stall the game or make the game less threatening for you against graveyard-based matchups. We have Devils playing the side, which sides in against control. It's another win condition for us because whenever it gets to late game, we can cast it and also flash it back again. And then the last card that we have here is Pillar of Flame. So we're running 2 pillars in the sideboard against really, really quick aggro decks where we can side it in, we can use it like even turn 1, turn 2, get rid of any threats our opponent has that are 2 or less toughness. And it can be easily flashed back with Snapcaster Mage to use more removal from there. So the 2 pillars are definitely relevant as well. So that is the main board and the sideboard for this USA Control deck. So if you guys enjoyed this deck, please be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. And until next time, guys, have a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.